fearfully and wonderfully made human. I'm Diana S. Rice, licensed mental health counselor, certified integrative mental health professional, and your host here on the Holistic Counselor podcast, where we explore faith based, trauma informed, and holistic approaches to mental health, emotional healing, and human flourishing. Today's episode is deeply aligned with that mission, and it all started with a newsletter. I want to give a heartfelt shout out to Joe Padilla from Mental Health Grace Alliance. Joe joined me back on episode 57, Healing from Church Hurt with Neuroscience and Grace, where we explored how faith and brain science can help people recover from religious trauma and chronic emotional stress. In a recent Grace Alliance newsletter, I was introduced to the work of Dr. Corey Keyes, and it hit me like a divine appointment. His research gave language to something many of us feel but can't name. And I knew immediately I needed to bring this conversation to you. Dr. Corey Keyes is a pioneering sociologist widely recognized for introducing the world to the concepts of languishing, flourishing, and the mental health continuum. Tools that help us move beyond symptom management into a life of purpose, joy, connection, and well being. He is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Emory University, where he held the Winship Distinguished Research Professorship, and he co hosted the very first Positive Psychology Summit with Gallup back in the late 1900s. Sorry, 1999 to be exact. Dr. Keyes was also part of the MacArthur Foundation Research Network on Successful Midlife Development, consulted globally with government and nonprofits, and currently serves as an external scholar with the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In this conversation, I hope you'll hear the difference between languishing and depression and why naming that foggy middle is powerful, the 5 mental health vitamins that help people truly flourish, why spirituality, play, and helping others are more than just fluff, they're essential to healing, and how sociology, yes, you hear me right, sociology, offers a powerful lens for understanding mental health that psychology alone often misses. If you're tired of surviving and ready to take ownership of your healing, even without a diagnosis, this episode is for you. And if you're a therapist, faith leader, or just someone who wants to live more intentionally, this framework will open new doors. So take a deep breath, lean in, get ready to explore what it means to move from languishing to flourishing. Thank you, Dr. Keyes, for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome, Diana. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's just start. Before we even get into the science and all your research, who are you behind the research?
Hmm. Well, I myself have come up, I've opened up about my early life trauma for the first 12 years before I was adopted by my grandparents. And that's part of the book and what propelled my interest, actually, ironically, in flourishing, but also languishing.
Yeah.
And that's part of that has been part of my lifelong journey. And my research, as I say, has been about me search.
Wow.
I have been looking for things that would help me stay in a healthier form of recovery because I have 2 mental disorders, PTSD and depression, and it wasn't simply enough to manage those because the absence of those things did not mean I was anywhere near flourishing. And
Mm.
so I intuitively knew I needed to get beyond the absence of mental illness to find something better.
Wow. Wow. And so you coined the term languishing.
Yes, well, I was searching for a word, Diana, that
Mm.
really got at the concept that languishing is sort of the in between mental illness and good mental health. Now, flourishing is the word I've adopted for true mental health, the presence of positive mental health.
Hmm.
You can have the absence of those good things that we can talk about that go into flourishing, but not end up with mental illness. You could be stuck in between. You
Yeah.
don't feel anything bad, but you don't feel anything good.
Yeah.
So, languishing was something I experienced early on in my life, even after I was adopted into this loving, warm, home, safe home with my grandparents. Suddenly, I was removed from all this violence.
Wow.
And I was doing well in school and in sports. I went from being in detention and a problem to suddenly being an honor roll student. But I would come to the end of the day feeling this gnawing sense of emptiness. And it was very haunting to me. It did not feel good. And so
Mhm.
later on, I would end up studying the very thing that haunted me. And the word that best described it for me
Yeah.
was to simply languish in life.
Yeah. I mean, can you just find that term a little more? Like, I mean, because I get it. I've been there too. I
Mm,
have a ACE score of 6, and the adverse childhood experience score.
yeah,
So I get
yeah,
it. And I do when I worked in alternative schools in Broward County, Florida. I mean, that's
mm,
it. They're in those places like you're saying. And but we are in this generation, Dr. Keys, or Corey, like you told me to
correct.
call you.
Yes.
um, um, where we are having such an epidemic of anxiety and depression, and people are self-diagnosing because of TikTok and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So to me, I want the listener to really understand languishing. First of all, they're not alone. What you
Hmm.
just shared, you've been there, and so have I. And we're now
Yeah.
two human beings, wounded healers that are now moved forward, right? And we're trying to pass the
Hmm.
baton. And languishing, like that's a deep word.
Yeah, it is actually a condition that I can trace, and I did a lot of historical research that goes way back in history to the ancient desert monks, Evagris, Ponticus, and others who wrote about it. And they used the word back then, acedia,
Hmm.
and it was the eighth deadly sin. I
Wow.
kid you not, there were eighth deadly sins before the 12th century when Pope Gregory actually removed it.
Wow.
And we don't understand why it got removed or if it got folded into sloth, but acedia
Hmm.
was defined by the desert monks as want for interest in life. They
Hmm.
would get up early and go through their spiritual and physical regimens. And in the midday, they would suddenly come to rest as as a young man, would come to the end of the day and I would stop doing and I would rest. And suddenly they would feel this piercing darkness in their soul and emptiness in their vessel. And it was haunting to them. And what people usually want to do to get rid of it is fill the void.
Yes.
And it leads them, the desert monks were very worried because this emptiness would lead them to engage in distractions rather than deep spiritual mission, right? So they were always worried that if they got back into their spiritual work, that they were doing it to distract themselves rather than to seek God.
Wow.
Right. That's a very different thing, right? So in the modern world, what we do to fill that void is food, sex, porn, you know, name anything and everything that we sort of use to distract ourselves. And it
Right.
usually is used to fill this hunger that is part of our spirit that has gone missing.
Yes. Wow. Yes. And I talk about that a lot on my show with different people. So,
Spirit,
I
yes. So
mean, just,
languishing is an
yeah.
ancient
Wow.
thing that now the way I define it is it's the absence of the ingredients of flourishing. It's
Mm,
the absence of the good things. It's not necessarily immediately the presence of bad things like depression and anxiety. Having said that, it is a gateway if
hmm.
you stay there too long for mental
Exactly.
illness also coming on board.
Yes.
In and of itself, it's the absence of things like purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense that anything you do matters to the world or contributes to the world, an absence of acceptance of self and other people,
Hmm.
and an absence of happiness or well-being or interest in life.
Yeah.
It's the absence of good things.
Yes. It is. And that's a hard place because whatever fires together, wires together, right?
Mm,
Neuroplasticity, like what we learn, well, what I've learned, I don't know if everybody's learned that yet, but this is something actually I'm teaching this Thursday, faith and neuroplasticity at the
mm,
United Way of Broward County. But when this show comes out, it's already happened. But anyway, um, that what
mm.
you're saying and what you're stating, is that part of the mental health continuum that you created or the five vitamins of flourishing? Can we go into that more?
It's part of the mental health continuum. The five
Okay.
vitamins are actually everyday activities that people can use who are depressed or languishing
Mm-hmm.
to begin to move up the mental health continuum. So the mental health continuum was my way of developing a diagnosis. And yes, I do diagnose the presence and absence of good mental health. And there are 14 questions on what I call the mental health continuum short form,
Mm-hmm.
three of which get at emotional well-being. How happy, satisfied with life, or interested in life have you felt in the last 2 weeks or past month? Now, to flourish, you have to have it only one of those three almost every day.
Wow.
But that is simply not enough. There are 11 signs of functioning well.
Okay.
Six of them are psychological well being. So things like, do you self acceptance? Do you like most parts of your personality?
Hmm.
Do you have warm, trusting relationships? Are you being challenged to grow and become a better person? Do you have confidence to think and express your own ideas and opinions? Those are four out of the six psychological well being. And then there's five social well being that I pioneered in my dissertation as the form of social health that people need. So there's a sense of integration. Everyone is aware of that. You have to have a sense of belonging. There's a
Mm-hmm.
sense of contribution, that the
Mm-hmm.
things you do contribute worth and value to somewhere in the world. But then there's three things that get ignored. A sense of coherence. Can you make sense of the world you're a part of?
Yeah.
There's a sense of social growth. Are you being challenged to become a better teammate, a member of institutions, your community, your society? And then there's social acceptance. Are you able to accept most parts of other people?
Yeah.
Right?
Wow, that's
And
empathy. Yeah.
so, right. And so to flourish, in addition to one out of the three emotional, you have to have
Mhm.
it any six out of the 11, six or more, almost
Okay.
every day. It can be any of the 11 signs of functioning well,
Okay.
right? So six out of the 11 plus one out of the three, that's seven out of the 14,
Yeah.
almost every day. And here's the way to think about it. I unintentionally turned depression on its head.
Okay. Now
Because
we really need to talk about this.
Right, because to be depressed, psychiatrists say you have to have one out of the two anhedonia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sadness or a loss of interest in life
Right.
almost every day for 2 weeks or more,
Right.
combined with at least four out of the remaining seven signs of malfunctioning,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Flourishing flips that on its head and says
Yeah.
you have to have one out of the feeling good combined with six out of the 11 functioning well, and you are mentally healthy.
Yeah. I love this, Dr. Keys. I'm telling you, this is great. And the reason I say that is because I shared with you, like, I'm non-pathological. I mean, I'm in a
Mm,
private practice, but I'm spending more time consulting and coaching and podcasting
mhm.
than I am. I have probably, a smaller practice. But it's because I'm trying to teach the holistic approach because many, we're in a society that's very conventional, money driven, and I'm not putting my let's say mental health practitioners down or psychiatry down or anything
Yeah.
like that. There's a place for all of us,
Hmm.
but it's the attention of the heart of the practitioner, and I want to help give tools out to the human that's listening to become a member of society in a healthy way. There's so much suffering. And I know that through my dark night of the soul, because that's what it is, a dark night of the soul.
Hmm.
So what you were just talking about, the men in the desert searching, right? We all have to go through that at times.
Yeah.
That's where growth, the obstacle is the way. That's where growth happens. But we have a society that contributes with fear porn, okay? And not just,
Hmm.
and just like you have this, we're scared of feeling these, what we call negative emotions. Yeah, and you know what I'm talking about, like the sadness, the
Yeah.
anger, the anxiety, and the depression. These are symptoms. To me, that's what I tell my clients. These are symptoms. Your mind, your body, your spirit, it's telling you something. So we have to be still. Yeah.
Yes. Listen to it. Just listen to it for a little while.
Yeah.
Welcome it in, as Rumi said
Oh,
in right his poem.
mm,
It's knocking on our door and welcome it in as a guest because it's here to clear the house so that you have something good that you can take from it. We're here.
yeah.
It's here to teach us some things, and that's a
Yes.
hard lesson, isn't it, Diane? I wanted to jump over it. I did not want to work through it. We say work through the trauma, and I'm like,
No.
yes, no, I wanted to jump over it, and I thought I outsmarted it. And guess
Hmm.
what? It was always in my rear view mirror.
Hmm.
And it took me to the age of 50 to 55 where it finally exhausted me. And I had to face it
Yes. Wow.
because otherwise it defines you or destroys you.
Yes.
Yes, and I decided no longer do you get to define or do are you going to destroy me? Because my attitude was the best revenge for trauma is to make something beautiful out of it and
Amen.
gift something into the world that the trauma says, no, you are not worthy. You have nothing to give. And I'm like, no, nothing in this world was planted without the intention to grow.
Oh,
Why would God put anything in this world without its ability to grow?
yeah.
And I had to accept that this was the only life I had. And I had to do something with what I was given.
Yes.
I didn't
Yeah.
like that attitude. I was given trauma, so that's what I had to deal with.
Yeah. No, and you're so right on. Like this is beautiful. Like I hope, listener, that you understand if you're feeling these, what we're talking about, the languishing or the
Yeah.
depression or the sadness or the anxiety, like here it is. It's time to not ignore it anymore. It's can I ask
Mhm.
you, is your assessment that you were just talking about, is that available to everybody to use? Like, could I use that in my practice?
Yes, it's publicly available. That was very intentional. I put it out and it's out there in the world and anyone can use it. It's also in my book and but it's also online. You could if you look up the Mental Health Continuum
Mm,
short form,
okay.
the MHC-SF is well known, used all over the world and translated almost in most cultures now.
Okay.
It's widely available. And I encourage you to use because I do want us to talk about how languishing is also part of mental illness and it doesn't get recognized. And it's creating a lot of problems that we attribute only to the mental illness.
Mm,
And it's usually untreated. And so if therapy works, it just leaves people free of the mental illness, but it parks them in languishing.
yeah.
And that's not a good place to leave patients.
No.
Not a good place because it's a revolving door. The more severe you're languishing, the more likely you are to relapse or have a recurrence. Your
Yeah.
remission will not last.
Right.
That's why I intuitively went searching for something beyond it because I felt like this is this the point of life? Just to get rid of the negative?
Mm,
And then
wow.
all I do is feel the emptiness?
Mm,
No, that was simply not enough. That is not a life worth living.
yeah. No.
So it's there with our mental illness, and even if you're free of mental illness, it's there for most people.
Yeah.
It's
So ho-
there. So
so let's
we
talk
have to
about it.
address it.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go in there. Like, because that's it. Someone might be listening and they're in that fog or going through the motions, or they're feeling better, they've gotten the help and they're, you know, like, what do we do? What do we say? How do we help?
Yeah. Well, one thing is it's very instructive just to look at the questions. And I would encourage your listeners to just, e- even if you don't want to complete the mental health continuum short form, just look at the questions. Like, do the things that you get to do or have to do on a daily basis contribute anything of worth and value to your community, your society, your family?
Mm,
Now I'm paraphrasing, but let's just start with that one. That's one question about social well-being.
yeah.
There are a lot of people doing some very valuable things in the world, and society has led them to believe that it doesn't matter. It's just expected of you. I think of caregivers and often the work that women do that's expected because you're a female. And they do all this amazing caregiving, and somehow they're walking around thinking that what I do doesn't contribute anything of worth and value.
Yeah.
Let's get rid of it right there. Let's address that.
Yes.
Now, you can focus on society. I'm a sociologist. I want to change the world, but I'm not going to wait for that.
Right.
I'm going to change the way I look at myself and what I do, and in my immediate environment, which I have control over. The world has a lot to do in terms of changing its isms, sexism, homophobia, racism, all that. That
Yes.
has to change, don't get me wrong. But while we're waiting for the world to change, we can start valuing each other's work. We can start saying thank you. I thank you for what you do for me.
Wow.
Right? Just
Yes.
thank you. I mean, and once you start hearing thank you, you start feeling, wow, what I'm doing matters.
Yeah. Oh no, I didn't know that I was practicing positive psychology back in the day when I was working at the alternative schools, but I would
Mhm.
when I had a teenager come in and, I worked in alternative schools, so if people know what that means, it's like a lot of kids that got kicked out of school or that was their last place to go before they really end up in jail or someplace. But when they show up, I'd be like, they thought I was nuts. They would open up after a while because they had to earn trust because people with PTSD and a young CPTSD is what I'm talking about, childhood
Yes.
PTSD, the trust is gone,
Yeah.
right? The trust is gone. I mean, you're working through a lot of dark places inside the soul and stuff. But I would say thank you. I'm like, thank you for showing up, and they're just looking at me. Wow, you're thanking. I didn't do anything. I'm like, no, you're here.
No, you're present. Yeah. The mere act of showing up is just a beautiful thing. Now, are you ready for all that I have to offer? No, you might not be.
Right.
But that's yeah. It's a beautiful thing to have somebody who's a teacher who knows what they're dealing with because I remember being in detention weekly, regular basis. I could not sit still. They would have diagnosed me as ADHD, but when in fact, you do not put me in a room facing away from the door, having to sit still, as I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I was afraid.
Yeah.
And how can anyone learn when they're afraid?
Exactly. It's your brain on fire. It's your system, your central nervous system. It's trying to keep you safe. And when people
Mm,
start understanding that more and more, they'll understand also the tools, like what Dr. Keys just shared, his assessment and realizing like there's ways to rewire the brain and to understand. And there's so much out there. It's just we don't know. We don't know. We don't teach this in schools. We don't even in my field, like we're trained very insurance-based models, or it depends what school you go to. And nowadays I see that there's a
mhm,
change in the medical field, where we're learning about
mm,
nutrition and like a holistic approach of being a human.
yeah.
But our ancestors kind of sort of knew it in a way, like about
Mhm,
mind, body, spirit connection. Um, you know, so why do you think spirituality, is
mm,
a key component of mental wellness? And for those raised in traditions that emphasize suffering, guilt, suppression, how can they
mm.
reconnect with spirituality as a source of flourishing instead of shame?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure most of your listeners are pretty aware of the distinction of spirituality and religion and the institutional versus, but to me, spirituality does not necessarily happen in organized religion.
Mhm.
Um, but they can overlap, and that's a beautiful thing when they do, because to me, spirituality is the practice, the self practice arm of what religion usually talks about, but we don't do. We just talk about what you should be doing. We don't work on it.
Mm.
So you might get a sermon, as I did as a Catholic boy, on empathy or kindness. We
Mhm.
should be kinder, right? And then that you leave and you think about kindness, and then you go back to your everyday life.
Yeah.
Well, spirituality is this practice of being aware and trying to encourage a mindset in yourself. You don't do this in church, you do this at home, is the way I think about it. You do it in nature, you do it almost anywhere else, but you're working on yourself becoming a kinder person by trying to encourage more kindness.
Yes.
And I think of this is the way I love yoga for this very reason, right? It's a as well as Buddhism. It's to become spiritual. First, you have to quiet your mind and the ego.
Yes.
That's yoga. We think of yoga and Buddhism only as meditation and poses.
Right.
Well, though that's just preparation. Once you've quieted the mind and you're focused, you can begin to work on yourself and trying to think more about kindness, trying to create the intention to be kind today. Because kindness is a muscle.
Yes.
It's not something that gets exercised by dice. Just thinking about it, you think about it and then you have to do it. Think and do. The way I
Mhm.
describe it in my book is spirituality is a dress rehearsal. So, in the way any kid who is going to do a music performance engages in a form of rehearsal before he or she goes on stage, which is very stressful,
Yes.
right? They spend a lot of time practicing, practice, 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 so that when they get on stage and it's very stressful, they have the mindset and the muscle memory to perform and do the right thing and not let the stress overwhelm them. Well, guess what happens when you get out in real life? Excuse my words, but shit happens. And
Yeah.
what does it do? It makes you angry and it creates
Yes.
negative emotions. What do negative emotions in? Make you react.
Yes.
The worst thing is to be reactive. So spirituality is a dress rehearsal so that you slow things down, you're prepared for the stage of where anger and stress is going to happen,
Hmm.
and you choose to
Yeah.
respond out of your deeply held commitments, values, and spiritual principles.
Yes.
And
Love
when
it.
you do that in the midst of bad things, you transform yourself in the situation so that when you remove yourself, you look back and you're proud
Hmm.
rather than ashamed and disgusted with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't get even. I didn't act on revenge. I didn't act on anger. No. The best thing sometimes is simply, I said nothing.
Yeah.
And I
Be,
said, have a good day. We'll
yeah.
talk later.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's empowerment. That's one thing that I had to teach, and
Exactly.
I still teach my clients. It's teaching them how to respond in wisdom instead of react in emotion.
Hmm.
And that happens because, well, especially if you grew up with in turmoil or chaos, your nervous system kind of already knows that and it's comfortable. And I remember
It's very easy. Yes.
someone, one of my guests, I forgot which one, but she said people are wanting to stay in their comfortable hell instead of working hard to go into a uncomfortable heaven.
Yeah. Hmm.
Right? And it
Yeah.
makes sense. And to me, like in my faith tradition, that's is why I start with my clientele with Psalm 139 and
Hmm.
I Psalm 23 and understanding like who they are It's like understanding they're fearfully and wonderfully made, understanding that they do have, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I mean,
Hmm.
and this is what I utilize to try to reconnect their brain because, like you're saying, we have the right to choose. That's how we get empowered. I could go
Right.
off the second someone comes and crosses me or cuts me off in traffic or
Hmm.
attack me. I could. And sometimes, depending on how well I rested, how I ate, all the things you talk about in the having, for flourishing, if those are like at minimal, or you're not getting any of that and you're deep in languishing, it's so easy to pop off.
It is very easy. Yes. And then add PTSD to, like,
Yeah.
as you said, to the situation of languishing. Many times I'd be cruising along, flourishing, and then the workplace was a difficult place for me. It re-traumatized me in many ways I didn't realize. And something would happen. And suddenly I would like do something that, like, I thought I was crazy sometimes. And I bet my colleagues thought I was. And yet what I realized was that I was giving away my power to choose. When they did something wrong to me, I said, you don't get to do that anymore, right? You don't get to hurt me. And that was not a great way to deal with my PTSD, like creating a concrete wall, like, you don't get to hurt me anymore.
Right.
Um, because then I gave away my power by saying I lashed out, and now the problem was me rather than addressing the wrong that they did, right?
Mm,
And so I had to slow things down. I had to learn how to slow things down. And yoga was the way in which the world became manageable to me.
yeah.
I'm a long-term practitioner, and boy, the mat creates a quiet place so that I can go out into the world, and it comes in a pace that I can handle, and the best version of me comes out, and God is very happy, right? Because boy, he's like, Corey, you are being the part that I know you are capable of.
Mm.
And I always loved the two wolves story because I think it's a
Yes.
very, right, that
I use that
we,
all the time. The
yeah,
Cherokee, yes.
yes, that it's that's just part of our nature, that the bad wolf it gets fed a lot more when you have been traumatized and stressed out and abused and mistreated and treated with all the isms, and you're hunting for disrespect. Anyone who disrespects you, you will. That doesn't feed the good wolf.
No.
Oh no. And I know all of us are potent. We have the divine in us. Just
Yes.
like the Buddhists say, all of us have Buddhahood. We're all potential Buddhas. I know
And, and
that.
and that's how it is for us too. I mean, Galatians 3:28 is my favorite Bible verse because it says, "There's neither Jew or Greek, male or female. We're all one in Christ Jesus." And to
Hmm.
me, that says that we have the divine in us. It's what we feed. That Cherokee Native, I think it's a Native American. I'm going to put that in the
Hmm.
show notes along with Dr. Key's assessment that he talked about because to me, these are
Yes.
important tools. If people could just pick up these tools like that we mention here or in all my episodes, I try to mention tools because not everybody could afford therapy, Dr. Keys. Not everybody could afford it.
No, no, I know. And that's why I wrote about the five vitamins in the book, because um, and we can talk about more of, like, 'cause spirituality, religion was one of the five vitamins
Yeah.
that people who did more of those, that spiritual slash religious activities,
Mhm.
even if they're depressed or languishing, began to have better days with awe, inspiration, gratitude, and good things. And that began to lift them out of those two places and move them
Yes.
slowly, but
Yeah.
towards flourishing.
Right.
And
And
if
and
you're
it,
flourishing,
yeah.
you needed to keep doing those things, because if
Right.
you'd stop doing them, guess what? You started to
Y-
slide back down.
Yes, I agree.
So that was one of the five vitamins. And those are things we can all do. We don't have to pay anyone to go play, learn something new, help other people, engage in spiritual religious activities, and so forth. We don't. We just have to prioritize them.
Mm-hmm. And that's yeah. So those are the five vitamins then: spirituality, social connection,
Connection
learning, play, and helping others.
and
I
helping
do
others.
talk
Yeah.
about volunteer. Like sometimes people come into my office and they've already been through a few therapists, and then they come to me and I'm like, "When was the last time you volunteer?" And they get mad at me and they're like, "Well, I can't even get out of bed. I'm so sad." And I'm
Mhm,
and I'm like,
mhm.
I understand that, but I
That
want you to
that is
understand then,
true.
you're paying me big bucks. And so either you're going to listen to the things that have worked, that's healthy, uh, that's going to build you up. And, because I'm all about the food and mood and the gut brain health.
Mhm.
And of course, the spirituality is probably the starting point because
Yeah.
we live in a culture and society that is just constantly with the news and social media, especially the younger generations that are coming. We blame we. It's so funny how generation after generation, like the older ones, like Gen X blaming the zillennials or the millennials blaming the Gen Zs. The Gen Zs will be blaming Gen
Yes.
Alpha, right? And baby boomers are blaming everybody. But but we
Yeah.
have to realize, guess who raised the next generation?
Hmm.
So I'm
And
trying, right? Go ahead.
yeah, and we're and it's nothing new. We think that we've got it so different. And yes, I think our ancestors faced different material, economic situations. That's obvious.
Yes.
And yet, to think of the nature of struggle as it's been a universal thing. It's been to think that languishing with a different name of the same thing has been with us throughout human history.
Mhm.
There is nothing new here. The world is going to be a place where we suffer.
Yes.
We will suffer in various ways, in different forms, and sometimes more than others, some of us, and sometimes often at the hands of each other. And yet, I think there is this amazing role for things of spiritual and religious, because can't think of anything else in life throughout human history that, when practiced in what I thought Jesus's message was, if practiced in the way that we are supposed to work on becoming better people.
Yes.
The bottom line, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, they all get back to something called the Eightfold Path. How can you be a more ethical person? Kinder, forgiving, compassionate, loving, generous. Those are the things we need to work on. And
Yes.
human beings will always be working on that. And to think, well, the world's a difficult place right now. Yes. But that's as if God is simply saying, now is your opportunity to learn. Here is now more than ever the chance to be a good person.
Yeah.
It's not easy,
No.
is it?
No.
But it's a really amazing feat. It would be so proud of us if we could actually transform our anger into kindness, our
Yes.
selfishness into generosity right now, and stop blaming the world for a moment.
Yes.
Because everyone can blame the world throughout human history.
Mm-hmm.
It's teaching us something.
Yeah.
We have a choice, an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get it. When I was so defined by my trauma, I was always a victim. And blame is so easy
It is.
when I've looked at that. And boy, the ego then would come out and say, you haven't fed me enough. Come on. Look at all that I've accomplished. Come on.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Exactly.
no,
Exactly. I
no.
can't. It is the ego and how I see it because we have Christianese, words. So it's like ego equals flesh, people, right? And humility
Mm-hmm.
equals spirit.
Spirit, yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so it depends which one you feed, which wolf you feed, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and how do you do that? Well, it's checking yourself. It's understanding that you're responsible for you no matter what has happened to you.
Yeah. Yeah. You may not have deserved it. You may not have caused it.
Exactly.
That let's and that we need to all honor and just but that does not give you permission to say I have no role in doing something about it because you are the only one in the end
Yeah.
that has that choice. I can't make you, you can't make your patients.
No,
No,
not at
I
all.
had to choose it, and I had to come to a very even darker
Night of the soul.
night of the soul to
Yeah.
say, okay, I've got to work on this, and I got to. This is me. I
Mm,
have to work on me.
yeah. And how did you, because I know I have my journey that I was given, right, on how to get
Mhm.
from that place to being able, and I try to share the things that helped me, but I have to have the listener understand that they're their own biology, psychology, theology. They hear me say this probably in every episode, but it's true.
Mhm.
Like we are our own. So what worked for me might not work for Dr. Keys, and Dr. Keys, what worked for
Mhm.
him might not work for the next human being. But sometimes you pick it up and you figure out, oh, this might work. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
what worked for you? How did you get out
Mm.
of the funk?
Oh, well, every time I acknowledged that I needed help, I suddenly changed and transformed. I would sit in languishing because what languishing does is create an invisibility where you start to recede into the background because part of you wants to disappear and then part of you is disappearing.
Mm,
So people don't, I mean, when you're languishing, you don't act in the way that anyone would say, wow, oh, look at so and so, look at Diana, look at Corey. He's like, just sit. You want to isolate, retreat. And then the more you do that, the more you feel like you're on your own.
yes.
And none of us, I never solved any of the problems or accomplished anything good on my own. And I write about this in the book. And I have my wall of love in my right because biologically, my family, I had to recreate a family. So my wall of love is made up of the one biological family, which was my paternal grandparents.
Mm,
But beyond that, I have professors, friends, neighbors that have become my synthetic family,
I
and
love it.
therapists where I simply said, I need help. And I went searching for help. And I didn't have I couldn't use the attitude, well, you don't have my lived experience. I hear that a lot. Oh, you don't know what I've gone through. I was like, no, I don't.
I don't.
But
Exactly.
throughout human history, there have always been gurus, shamans, leaders, and they have walked a path where they have tried to accumulate as much knowledge and wisdom for themselves that could be useful.
Yeah.
All we can do is ask for help. And
Yes.
that was always the key for me going from languishing to moving out towards flourishing.
Yeah.
Because then I had to realize, you know, I had this therapist who was a CBT therapist. She said, Corey, I want you to know as we start this journey together, maybe 20% of the magic is me. That's even being generous. 80% of is going to be that you were doing the work. And CBT was filled with homework.
Yes.
So I would get to talk about things, but then I would have to work on things. Work, work, work. And I'm like, that was the key. I had to say, I needed help.
Hmm.
There's a guide, but ultimately, nothing inside me is going to change by simply thinking. I had to
That's
do.
right.
I had to
Yes.
do, do, do. And that was a lesson that the ego simply screamed at the beginning.
Hmm.
And then it's suddenly quieted because I talk about this big time in the book. I
Hmm.
had to learn to start small.
Yes.
Every
Exactly.
start like meditation when we did it was a minute. And I would laugh at them. My therapist would laugh at me. And I was like, I'm thinking, what would a minute a day? And she
Big.
would look at me, Corey, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Promise me you will trust me. And just do it. And I would laugh. And then to make sure if I was doing it, we would do it together to begin.
Mm,
And then suddenly I realized before long, 2 months later, I'm doing it 5 minutes a day. The problem was I wanted to jump right to 20 minutes, and
exactly.
never having done meditation would have been the worst thing because I would have
Yes.
failed and I would have said, "This sucks. I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Give me something else."
Right.
And I learned I had to start small.
Yes.
And my ego had to just, I had to stop listening to it and stop laughing at what I was told because I'd asked for help. And then
Mm-hmm.
when they wanted to help me, what did my ego do? Laugh, laugh, laugh.
Yeah. And you have to
Then I had
challenge
to,
that,
yeah, and then
right?
I
You
had
had to
to,
challenge
okay.
all that.
Mhm. And I'm a big believer. Nothing big has ever started with something big. It always
No.
started small.
Exactly. Exactly. It's just we live in a culture where we're comparing things constantly, constantly. Because I work with mostly 25 to 35-year-olds now. And so
Mm,
that's where I'm seeing I'm like, okay, start small. You're going to spend
yeah,
30 minutes if you can without your phone. And they freak
yeah.
because that's an addiction in itself,
I
you
know
know?
everything's too immediate, isn't it? And
And
it's like I have to tell you this amazing story that because His Holiness the Dalai Lama would visit Emory every 3 years. He
mm,
was and he had a relationship with. And I remember one of his visits. He said at one of our meetings, I don't think people realize that I didn't just end up at the top of Everest. And even today, I'm not at the top of Everest. Every day I get angry and I have to work on it every day. And people need to understand it took me a long time to just get 2/3 of the way at
wow.
my personal Everest. And I have to climb back down to another camp lower sometimes and practice, practice, practice. People look at me and they say, "Oh, I want to be like His Holiness the Dalai Lama." And I say, "No, you don't. I have to work at this every day." And I've been working at it a lifelong time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we look at these people who seem to have their stuff together. And it's like, he was the most honest about it. And I'm like, our young people need to hear that
Yes.
again and
Yeah.
again and again. People that we revere are imperfect.
Hmm.
They're still working on it and they go easy on themselves and others, but they're always working on being a better person.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is this is why I think many people who get to a point where people think they're high up and then they fall, it is to me, it's due to the ego. And finally, I think the
Yeah.
creator of the universe are going, all right, you think you're me now. Smite. No, no, I'm just kidding. Not smite, but
No, I know. Well, no, it's like
yeah.
a little humility will do you well
Yes.
because, yeah, humility
Yes.
is you need to always know who you are and what you are and be willing to learn.
Hmm.
Every day, humility is I know what I am, who I am, and I need to learn.
Yes, exactly.
And
I will
I
never
stopped
know it
doing
all.
it.
Yes.
No, and I will never be finished knowing what I am and who I am, but I will always know I have more to learn.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like, so what would you say if you were able to write your own manual of mental wellness? Like, if you could redesign the DSM, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual. I know
Mm,
you're a sociologist, so it's very different than
mm,
the way I was taught in school and how what I do for a living. They tried to teach me. This is why I think I went off to private practice because it was just very not, it just felt like they just focus more on symptoms and
mm,
medicinal management. And to me, listen, I'm not going to put anyone down that is taking medicine. I get it. Like you're
yeah.
suffering and it's helping you, good. But there are other ways too, right? And we don't want to talk about it sometimes because we're just being on commercials constantly bombarded of this is this is that, this is that. Here you go. Here's your symptom. Here's this. And because nobody wants to feel the pain or go through it, like we talked about in the
No.
beginning. So, what do you think the clinical field is missing when it comes to measuring or supporting human well-being?
Well, first off, that we seem to be a healthcare system that I really call a sick care system, that's focused on, I would say, triage and a sort of pit stop model. If your tires are getting worn out, you're running low on gas, come into the pit. I need to get you back in the race.
Oh,
Boom,
yeah.
boom. The race isn't done. You got more to do. Um, I understand that model, but I also respect the fact that the DSM, I used to teach it in that, and the transformation from DSM 1 and 2 to 3 was amazing. And I also acknowledge the fact that we're dealing with something really complex when we're talking about mental illness, because we're talking about problems and disturbances of three systems: how you think, how you feel, and how you behave.
Hmm.
There's no other disease or disorder that is combines so many systems and isn't it? It's a very hard thing to diagnose. They're still struggling with, how to diagnose it. And yet we know that depression's out there. We know anxiety is out there. And when it becomes pathological, and we can critique the DSM and say, well, the threshold might be a little arbitrary, but we have to decide when to act. Or we end up treating everyone because almost everyone has some of those symptoms.
Right.
So I get it. But at the same time, what we're ignoring is the mental health continuum.
Mm.
Because I am all about the two continuum model. The absence of mental illness does not mean everyone's mentally healthy. And the vast majority of the world exists on my side of the continuum, which is they're free of mental illness, but they're not mentally healthy. And we do nothing for those people who are languishing to some degree.
Hmm.
Because here's the thing, all the studies I review in my book and have come out since show that when you're flourishing or you're mentally healthy, you can do hard. You can deal with adversity. You can deal with conflict. You are quote unquote resilient. Yes, when bad things happen, you have a bad mood, but not nearly as negative as when you're languishing and have the same bad things happen.
Right.
So we're missing an opportunity to create mental preparedness in the world, because that's people need to be mentally healthy to deal with the world that's going to be full of slings and arrows.
Yeah.
And so we don't pay attention to languishing. And I think it's the reason we're not making any progress whatsoever in dealing with the crisis of mental illness. It keeps growing
Yes.
because it's the gateway. If you don't deal with people before they become mentally ill, right when they're languishing, it will get
Hmm.
worse. It will
Yeah.
get worse. Trust me.
So how do we fix that? You and I are in two different places, two different fields, but it seems like we're both talking kind of the same language in a way.
Yeah.
So what can I do? I'm a qualified supervisor. I have interns. So I would love to
Mhm.
teach. I have this podcast. I would love to teach. That's what you do. You teach,
Yeah.
right? And you've done these studies. Like where would a practitioner say I have an intern listening right now or someone a faith leader and they're like, where would you have a start to learn this model?
First, to prioritize the mental health continuum in anything and everything you do, because here's the thing, the research is very clear. The
Mhm.
things we now have that focus on mental illness can lower the bad,
Okay.
but they don't elevate the good on the mental health continuum.
Hmm.
And so we need, in my ideal world, we need an
Yeah.
institute at the National Institute of Health that focuses on the mental health continuum
Mm.
in the physical side and in the mental side,
Okay.
because it's a very different challenge. You need to develop new, novel ways to elevate positive physical health and positive mental health.
Yes.
Because the things we've been working on come from the, the pathogenesis, the pathological model, which is necessary. Because we won't prevent everything,
No.
but we need a whole new discipline that studies what are the things that deal with languishing and move people up the physical and the mental health continuum towards a flourishing state of being.
Okay.
Because we're just learning that.
Hmm.
And I review the evidence showing that the stuff on my side of the continuum is very genetic, just as heritable as the stuff on the mental illness and physical illness side.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
guess what? The genes for both overlap very modestly. So we inherit both a
Yeah.
potential for illness, with, in other words, genetic risk, and
Hmm.
all inherit to some degree genetic potential for physical and mental flourishing.
Yes.
But it takes different things
Right.
to elevate the good. And we need a research initiative at a national level that gives people the funds and the motivation to study this.
Yes. So that would be a great start. I mean, that would be a dream. You're right. Like, hopefully, people are listening and things are will change for the future. I mean, we have no choice because the way we're going now is definitely not working. Like
No, no,
diagnose and medicate, diagnose and medicate. It's not. It's just we're numbing people out. And so much hidden stuff. And I mean, like I told you in the beginning before we press record that this was put in my lap after much prayer is because I was trying to break stigma in churches and I was trying to break stigma in
mhm.
the BIPOC community, in my culture.
Yeah,
But this is more than just those two areas that need this. It's the social emotional learning. It's the mental health continuum. So where do we find your work, your book, all these things? So then maybe that's what we'll
yeah.
start. We'll start researching and utilizing it in our own practices first
Hmm.
because national, I get it. Like it is a public health issue. You're spot on. You're spot
Yeah,
on. But like we also said earlier, it has to do with what we're doing within our scope of influence
yeah.
because that's all we really have control of. I mean, this is where I
Hmm.
get people to hey, you're freaking out over politics, you're freaking out over this, you're freaking out, and that's because we're not meant, our brain's not meant to have 24/7 of worldwide news and things like
No.
that. And then the algorithm, oh my God, let's not go there. But people really don't understand that because they don't. I've done the research. I understand like you have to take a step back and practice the pause.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if there was ever, in my mind,
mhm.
a place for religious institutions to step up to the plate and say, we believe in something so much, it resonates so deeply with the message that we have that we think we need to support this as a public health initiative.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean we have all the answers, but man, the languishing to the flourishing continuum, I've heard some of the sermons, and it's amazing how languishing resonates with all passages in the Bible and the good books of every tradition, and how the elements of flourishing, purpose, belonging, acceptance, all those things also map on.
Yeah.
Now imagine if these churches got behind this and said, we want to extend our influence to creating a world where people of faith and of not yet there all get this. We believe in it that much. If there was ever a place for them to say, oh, let's take this message and we're going to do the sacred stuff, the divine
Mhm.
stuff, but also we want this to be part of the secular everyday world.
Yes. Exactly.
I I don't know what other institutions where this maps onto as beautifully and as
Right.
obviously.
Yeah.
It doesn't. resonate with the sick care system that we've medicalized everything. It doesn't.
No, not at all.
No. But from the religious spiritual traditions,
Hmm.
it seems to me it's a case where churches say that our message could be part of a public health agenda, not trying to make the whole world uh, our mission,
Right.
but the mental health continuum.
Right.
Let's pay attention to this.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Keys, I know I'm paying attention and I'm thinking like, oh, here comes a blog because I write a blog when I get moved to
Mm.
write it. So, or create a PDF with the Christian version or some, I don't know. I have to really. So, where can I find your book? Where can I find your work?
Oh, well, it's the paperback version just came out this February. It was
Okay.
published last year. It's called Languishing, and the subtitle is How to Feel Alive Again in a World That Wears Us Down.
Mm.
The way to think about flourishing, and I'm working on this initiative with some amazing colleagues, creating a human aliveness lab. Because when people are flourishing, they feel fully alive.
Yes.
And I think there's religious, spiritual, and secular traditions that all are designed to help us feel fully alive.
Yes.
And when you're languishing, people describe it this way. Uh, they're dying inside, or they
Hmm.
feel dead inside.
Yes.
I only want to experience one death in this life, but that's when my soul leaves. My spirit is done here and my body's done here.
Yes.
But most of us experience many deaths before that one, which is what I call the death of your sense of aliveness. Your
Mm.
spirit goes missing. That's languishing.
Yeah.
So that's what the book is about. Scientifically, it's about mental health continuum, but really it's
Okay.
about this sense of aliveness and this feeling of dead emptiness that
Wow.
pervades many of our lives.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the next book that I'll be reading, people. I mean, I usually read, well, no, actually don't. I just get excited and try to get people on my podcast.
Yes,
I'm going to be
it's hard
honest.
to read all these books before.
Oh,
I
yes.
know, I know.
And
Don't.
because honestly, Dr. Keys, reading, I can't believe I made it through college because I think my CPT, I had no idea back then that's what was happening. But when I read, I would read it and then reread it and then reread it. And then I would highlight. And I'm like, I can't believe I have a master's degree, people, because it
Well,
took
yeah,
time.
because sometimes everything seems important, and you have to
Yeah.
learn this ability to sort of say, "Well, let's pay
Right.
attention." Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know.
So before we go, would you like to say anything to the listener before we say goodbye?
Hmm. Well, it is a quote that I use at the end of the book, and it's been with me throughout my journey in life and why I study what I study. And it was Robert Kennedy, and he said this: most people look at life as it is,
Mm.
and they ask why. I choose to look at life as it could be and ask why not.
Mm. Wow.
And I had a choice, right? Because the thing I could not just look at what was done to me and simply be content with why, because it just wasn't enough. The only way I could get past the trauma was to say, okay, the best gift I have to give the world is to look at how the world could be. And my attitude should be always, why not?
I love it.
And that's it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a much better world to live in when all of us are looking. I want to live as if this is the world I want to be in,
Yes.
and always with the attitude, why not
Hmm.
me? But why not others?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not?
We're here interconnected with all living things. To me, I mean, I know people will think I'm sometimes woo-woo or new agey or whatever it is, but it's not. It is understanding I know who I am in Christ. I know what I believe in. Like you were saying, like my spirituality, I take serious. I take serious. And then my physical body, I
Mm,
take serious because it's a temple. And then, right?
mm,
And then my connection with human beings. I want to love others, right? Just as Jesus told me to love others. I want
yeah.
that's my role model is Christ. And religion causes wars. I get it. And it's because ego gets in the way of a lot of leaders, no matter what religion. And then it becomes a
Mhm.
money-making machine. But we're not even going to go to that tangent. But to me, like Dr. Keys, this was probably, well, I shouldn't say that, but one of the best episodes ever. And I thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, of
It is
course, of
because
course.
I just, what you said resonated big time with me, big time. And I cannot wait to read your book. And I don't know, maybe in the future collaborate with you somehow, some way. I have no clue,
Mm.
but I know this was a divine appointment and I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being on.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on, Diana. Thank you
Uh,
so much.
all right, listeners, you know how I end. And if you don't, go back and listen to some more episodes. So remember, trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.